What would you do if the person you trusted to steer the ship got tossed a reef of bad luck? Broken O-lines, a shaky secondary, and a string of plays that look more like bloopers than mistakes. And the owner still tells you, not yet. Keep steering. That's the cliff Miami is on right now. And Mike McDaniel is standing in the middle of it with a life preserver and a very complicated smile. Picture it. A season that began with whispers of genius. Innovative schemes, splashy wins, now limps along at 2-7. The front office shakes. Chris Grier, the man who built that roster and took the heat for every draft pick, is gone. Cameras swivel. Pundits sharpen their knives, fans write obituaries for the playbook. And then in an almost cinematic twist, owner Stephen Ross steps in and says, "We're not firing McDaniel this year." It's a line that reads like loyalty or like paralysis, depending on how loudly you feel the losses. Here's the tight truth everybody's trying to swallow. Coaching is choreography and personnel. Move the dancers, and the show changes. McDaniel has always been the kind of coach who asks his roster to perform complicated steps, pre-snap motions, creative run concepts, deceptive protections. When your offensive line can't hold a mirror up to those moves, the choreography falls apart. That's not always the coach's fault. It's also not a clean defense for him. Coaches shape culture, they influence personnel choices, and sometimes they push for players who fit their scheme. But the engine that signs the checks and drafts the players is the GM. With Grier gone, the narrative shifts. Whose plan is this mess? And because sports are emotional, not just analytic, this decision feels like an emotional vote as much as a tactical one. Ross's public affection for McDaniel isn't a secret. He once treated McDaniel like a prodigy, let him disrupt, let him tinker, let him invent. That same affection now looks risky to some. Keep a coach who's underwhelming while the roster tilts downward, or cut him loose and invite an entirely new direction under the pressure of public opinion? Ross chose the former for now. It's a bet that stability, not a midseason bloodletting, serves the franchise best. The optics of keeping McDaniel are twofold. On one hand, the team avoids the chaos of a midseason teardown. No interim coach, no sudden philosophical shift, no immediate draft panic. On the other hand, every loss becomes a referendum. Fans chant for change, analysts write timelines about contract years and cap implications, and each miscue becomes another argument for why not now. The next few games will be loud, not quiet. Now, let's not pretend McDaniel's hands are clean. Calls to go all in on creative offense can make a team play outside its strengths. If your offensive line is a sieve and your secondary keeps falling asleep on the back end, audacity alone won't save you. McDaniel's offense demands timing and cohesion. Without it, even brilliant play calling looks like noise. That's on him too. He's got to adapt, to find ways to simplify, to coach fundamentals when the talent isn't performing to the ideal. The hallmark of great coaches is that they can morph their philosophy to their players' reality. That's the test he now faces in front of a national audience. There's a human subplot here that people forget in the spreadsheet noise. Coaches build relationships. McDaniel's players bought into his culture. How many plays ended as highlight reel improvisations because the team trusted the structure he installed? When an owner says, "We'll keep him for now," it sends a message into the locker room. Hold on, the plan is still intact. That can stabilize a team on the verge of unraveling, but it can also prolong the agony if the plan is flawed. The choice is a double-edged sword. Let me be blunt. Firing a GM and keeping a coach is an odd 1-2 punch. It signals blame shifted toward the architects of the roster while the face of the scheme stays. For the incoming decision makers, general managers, personnel chiefs, scouts, this is both an opportunity and a headache. If you inherit job control while the coach remains, you either draft for his system or try to reshape the roster into a hybrid that fits both the coach and your vision. That's expensive in both time and capital. Whoever steps into the GM role after Grier will need to decide quickly, play nice with McDaniel, or build a bridge to a new era and hope the foundation holds long enough. And then there's the fan angle, arguably the loudest stakeholder. Fans are tired of near misses and bungled moments. They crave clarity and confidence, not messy experiments. When you're 2-7, patience thins. Some will see Ross's move as reckless loyalty to a coach who's lost the locker room. Others will see wisdom in avoiding a rash knee jerk. Either way, the message is now being judged on the field, not in boardrooms. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the broader league logic. Coaches who get the benefit of the doubt are typically ones that have a demonstrable track record of success, or who can sell a compelling long-term vision that looks salvageable. McDaniel, once hailed as a genius, now rides a reputation that's frayed but not destroyed. He's still young, still inventive, and still, if we're honest, capable of turning things around if the roster plays to his strengths and if injuries relent. The fear is that the roster won't, and that the clock on Ross's patience will tick louder next offseason. So what does not firing him through 2025 really mean? It's a holding pattern, a season-long audition where McDaniel must produce turnovers in the scoreboard and in public perception. He needs wins, actual ones, or at least games where the team looks like it's actually moving toward a coherent identity. Close losses don't cut it. The organization needs signs of systematic improvement. That's what makes the next stretch of games more than a string of contests. They're narrative pivots. And let's be human about Mike McDaniel for a moment. Imagine being the man in that chair. Brilliance and blame all braided together. You stand accused of losing your touch, but at the same time, the team keeps your playbook intact. Pressure amplifies, scrutiny tightens, and every timeout becomes a headline. Some coaches collapse under that, others sharpen into a more precise instrument. Which one McDaniel becomes will tell us a lot, not just about his future, but about how the franchise chooses to define itself. Finally, here's the smaller truth that feels like the hinge of the whole thing. Personnel matters. You can coach bravery and you can call bold plays, but if you don't have the bodies, reliable linemen, a steady secondary, depth across the roster, genius becomes a footnote. The next GM has to decide whether to build around McDaniel's identity or to build a roster that forces McDaniel to change. Either way, someone is going to be judged on whether they can align the plan with the players. If you want a single line to take home from this weird public divorce of leader and architect, it's this. The Dolphins have frozen the clock on immediate chaos, but they've started a long, noisy countdown. McDaniel gets more time, yes, but what he does with it will determine whether that time was wise patience or a delayed reckoning. So watch the next games not just for wins and losses, but for answers. Does the offense simplify where it must? Do players show life and accountability? Does the new front office move to repair obvious roster holes? Those are the signals that will tell you whether this pause was an act of faith or a postponement of the inevitable. And if you want the human moment to remember, imagine McDaniel, after a hard-fought win in late November, walking back through the tunnel. He doesn't hold trophies. He holds a clipboard and a blueprint. For today, that was enough. For tomorrow, he'll need to turn that blueprint into a house that doesn't leak. On October 31st, 2025, the Miami Dolphins shook up the front office. General Manager Chris Grier and the franchise mutually agreed to part ways. It was the sort of mid-season seismic move that smells of both accountability and panic. The owner deciding change can't wait. And it landed right before the trade deadline like an audible in the red zone. Reuters owner Stephen M. Ross put it plainly in the team statement. He decided a change was necessary to get the organization moving in the right direction. That's important because Ross is the guy who writes the checks and the narratives. When an owner says change now, it usually means the clock on patience has run out. Facebook.com. Here's the immediate housekeeping. Champ Kelly, a familiar NFL executive with previous interim GM experience, steps into the front office breach as the interim general manager while the team begins a search for a permanent replacement. That move matters because the interim GM is suddenly the deal maker who will steer the club through the next 2 weeks of roster decisions, waiver wire calls, and the trade deadline gauntlet. Reuters, and yes, the elephant in the room, head coach Mike McDaniel is staying, at least for now. Multiple reports citing league sources confirmed McDaniel will remain the Miami Dolphins head coach through the remainder of the 2025 season. That's the central tension of this whole story. The GM gone, the coach spared, and a franchise to ask whether this is a surgical fix or a public relations stopgap. ESPN.com. Let's unpack why this all matters. The Dolphins sit at 2-7. That kind of record at this point of the year isn't just bad luck. It's a pattern that forces ownership to reassess competence across scouting, roster construction, injury mitigation, and coaching. Chris Grier had been with the franchise for decades and was GM since 2016. His departure is not just a personnel change, it's a cultural rupture. NFL.com. But why keep Mike McDaniel? The simplest explanation is this: timing. You don't always drive a car while changing the engine in the middle of a highway. The team still has a season to finish, and firing a head coach right before a playoff push that's already not happening is messy. Plus, McDaniel has a track record, quick offensive innovation, playoff appearances, and a relationship with owner Stephen Ross that has weathered ups and downs. For now, Ross appears to be betting that replacing the GM gives Miami the administrative reboot it wants without detonating the coaching staff midstream. So that doesn't make McDaniel's job safe indefinitely. In public, he's got the leash. Privately, the math is straightforward. If Miami doesn't show clear improvement, the next logical cut might be the head coach. Remember, owners frequently change GMs first because they're the catalogers of roster construction. If that doesn't fix the issue, they move to the coaching staff. For McDaniel, surviving the rest of this season buys time, but it's time on a borrowed calendar. Sigh. Now consider the short-term chessboard. The trade deadline is a 2-week sprint away. With Champ Kelly temporarily in charge, the Dolphins' calls to other teams will carry a different tone. Interim GMs often have narrower mandates. Don't mortgage the future for a marginal upgrade, but do fix glaring holes if the price and fit make sense. In practice, that could mean packaging a mid-round pick for a controllable veteran or flipping depth pieces to shore up an offensive line. The